r/Askreddit by Reddit and chill. What's a cool history fact? When Socrates was on trial, he was so annoying during his defense that he convinced several of the jurors who had voted not guilty during the finding vote to vote for the death penalty during the sentencing vote. He's innocent, but he's so irritating. Kill him anyway. Oh man, it's even better than that. After he was voted guilty, the prosecution asked for the death penalty. Athenian law permitted the defense to offer a counter sentence, with the jurors able to pick between the two. Socrates' counter sentence was a public commendation and a house. I think the house. Not 100% sure. The jury chose death. Lincoln pardoned someone for attempted bestiality. That just sounds like someone couldn't get hard for a zebra and he told them it was fine and they should try again in half an hour. The shortest war in history was the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896. It lasted 38 minutes. How did it happen? When Beethoven was challenged to an improvisation duel by one of his rivals Stibelt, Beethoven took a piece of Stibelt's music, turned it upside down, played it and then improvised on that theme for over an hour. Stibelt simply left halfway through and never returned to Vienna where the duel took place. Stibelt played first. The piece Beethoven turned upside down was the one Stibelt had just finished playing. James Madison wrote a series of letters for President George Washington and the Congress to each other. There were 4 letters in total, and neither party knew that it was just Madison writing the letters to himself and reading it aloud to the other party. He was too embarrassed to say anything. Sounds like a real John Barron move. Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II reigned 1564-1576, died of consuming overly large amounts of peaches and cherries and chilled white wine. Sounds like a delicious way to go. Napoleon was once attacked by a horde of bunnies. Please continue. Belize is the only country in Central America with English as a primary language due to coral reefs and pirates. I'm sorry, what? Pirates once captured Julius Caesar and tried to hold him for ransom. When they told him how much the bounty would be, he laughed and their faces then demanded they increase the ransom cause he was worth more than that. What a power move. Edit. Can't believe I forgot one of my favorite history facts. The Greek philosopher Empedocles died by jumping into Mount Etna. He was either attempting to become an immortal god or trying to convince his followers he was one. Either way, he didn't come back. What a massive spoon. Oh, it gets better. Caesar made these guys love him. He entertained them, played games with them, told stories, read poems and plays, and assured them he'd crucify every single one of them once he was free. So, once his ransom had been paid, he got some soldiers and immediately made good on his promise to crucify them all, and also retrieved his ransom. At least 5 times in Earth's history the entire planet's animals, life and plants were reduced by 90%, 70% or more. Edit. Lots died. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Also, you being alive means there is an unbroken chain all the way back to the first life form that leads to you. Something survived every predator, every natural disaster, every extinction level event, every plague, every war, every depression, etc. All the way down to you. Be grateful for it, and try to make all that struggle worth something. Edit. Your edit does make yours more accurate. At least one of the events was 90% or more. The Great Dying. I think there was one other that was close, but not quite 90%. And most of the others were close to the 70% you changed it to. I think there were 5 great extinction events, but my memory is really rusty on this topic. Tiffany. Gary, there's one in the Nibelungenlied, which was written around the year 1200, and Chad are medieval names. There's something called the Tiffany problem among fantasy historical writers, in that they can't name a character something like Tiffany even though it's a medieval name because readers wouldn't believe it. After the discovery of the New World, the Pope mediated a dispute between Portugal and Spain to renegotiate a previous treaty that gave Portugal exclusive rights to trade and colonization below the Canaries. with the goal of making a vertical line instead and having this new world fall under Spain's sphere. Amid the negotiation, the Portuguese randomly asked that the line be moved west by a few thousand miles or so. This only gave Portugal more sea while potentially giving Spain land in the Pacific. So they accepted. A few years later, Brazil was discovered, with its gold mines, tropical wood and cash crop climate, placed under Portuguese rule by that line shift. According to the Code of Canon Law, any newly discovered territory fell under the jurisdiction of the diocese whence the expedition left. Therefore the Bishop of the Diocese of Orlando is also the Bishop of the Moon. The Catherine wheel firework is named after the execution method known as death by breaking on the wheel, which was used during the medieval and early modern periods. The felon would be tied to a large wheel and the executioner would break his bones with a staff before giving the death blow to the chest. The Catherine wheel also inspired the stupid ducking bonwheel skeletons in Dark Souls, against whom fighting is an even worse form of torture than the original wheel itself. Charles II of England hid from the Parliament's army up an oak tree, and now a lot of pubs in England are called the Royal Oak in commemoration to this. He's also responsible for appointing Henry Morgan to be the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. Without Charles II we wouldn't have had Captain Morgan rum. Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini were all nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize but never won. How the duck? In 1864, two ships shipwrecked on the desolate Auckland Island, 300 miles south of New Zealand. They were unaware of each other's existence, due to massive differences in leadership. From one ship, all survived, and from the other, almost none. The Grafton was shipwrecked on the 3rd of January 1864. Her castaway crew waited a year for a ship to come to their rescue, which, it soon became apparent, would not come. 6 months later, 3 men decided to set out in a dinghy and managed to cross a distance of 450 kilometers, 280 mi, to Stewart Island, 30 kilometers, 20 mi, south of New Zealand's South Island. They then funded a rescue mission to pick up their remaining companions. The crew spent a total of 18 months on the subantarctic island, and despite their ordeal, all survived. Wikipedia org link, ship. The Invercold struck the Auckland Islands at 2 a.m. on the 11th of May 1864. Broke up and was totally destroyed in a short amount of time. The Invercold crew, right from the time of the shipwreck, was dominated by an ethos of every man for himself. Individual crewmen, such as the cook, were abandoned to die just a few hundred yards from the rest of the group. Food wasn't shared equitably. Violence was commonplace, and the captain was primarily interested in his own survival. Eventually, when just 3 of the crew remained alive, they had the good luck of being spotted by a ship which had sailed in to repair a leak. It's very interesting and well worth a read. This is incredible considering that they were only about 10 miles apart, as the crow flies. The article does state that the infighting and crappy leadership of the Invercold crew was partly due to having almost no resources and food, compared to the Grafton. Roman Emperor Caracalla once visited Alexandria. One night he went to a theater show and the actors made fun of him during the show. It was just part of the program. He wasn't amused about this, so he ordered the entire population of the city, one of the biggest cities in the empire, to be executed for the mistake of a couple actors. Must have been a funny guy. Oh, he also murdered his brother in front of his mother. Did everyone die or did they just tell him it happened? Roman Emperor Titus had the Colosseum flooded in order to reenact a naval battle. Romans also invented arrows meant to decapitate ostriches. Arrows meant to decapitate ostriches. But why? When Montana was a part of Idaho Territory with Wyoming, the Abraham Lincoln sent Sidney Edgerton to become the first territorial judge in 1863. On his way to Lewiston, the territorial capital, he was forced to spend the winter in the gold rush boom town of Bannock, Montana. Here he saw gangs of highwaymen stealing from and murdering miners. Most notable being the Plummer Gang or the Innocents, allegedly led by Sheriff Henry Plummer. During the winter, fed up with the thieves and lack of law enforcement, Edgerton and other community members banded together to form the Montana Vigilantes. On the night the 10th of January, 1864. They stormed Plummer's home in the middle of a blizzard, dragged him out of bed and hung him from hastily constructed gallows next to 2 of his deputies. Over the next few weeks, 20 of Plummer's men were summarily arrested and executed by the Montana vigilantes. Edgerton, instead of going to Lewiston, went back to Washington, D.C. with $2,500 in gold nuggets and said Idaho Territory is too large to govern. He spent that gold lobbying to split up the territory. And when the time came to draw the map, Edgerton drew the Montana-Idaho border roughly 130 miles to the west of the agreed border, the Continental Divide, stealing a massive resource-abundant region for Montana. So that's why the Montana-Idaho border doesn't follow the Continental Divide. Montana history is sometimes quite interesting when you get into it, especially when you consider that the state was built upon people taking the law into their own hands. Prostitutes in ancient Greece would put their prices on the bottom of their sandals so that they could advertise their services while giving them. Wait, how would people see the prices? I don't know if it's history or myth, but supposedly at some event between the polis in ancient Greece, an old man was looking for a place to sit. It was crowded and no one offered him their seat, so he kept looking. When he got to the area where the Spartans were, all of them stood up and offered him their seat. He turned back to the others and said, only in Sparta it pays off to grow old. Apparently Spartans had a huge respect for old people. They thought if you've fought life long enough to grow old, you must be one tough SOB. Also, fun fact about Spartans. There were 2 main ways to earn a grave in Sparta: dying during military service or, surprisingly, dying during childbirth. Both were considered equally honorable. TBH, I find Sparta really interesting cause of stuff like that. They were some tough dunts. The Battle of Texel remains the only instance in history where a cavalry troop, horse-riding soldiers, captured a fleet of ships. It happened on this day in 1795. Though it wasn't exactly a battle. You can ride a horse on water. If it's cold enough. The water. Not the horse. Henry VI had a mace with a concealed gun built into it. He would take it out patrolling the streets of London, looking for ne'er-do-wells. Like a fat ginger Batman. Celtic warriors fought naked, and this terrified the Roman armies. In my opinion, though, a 5 feet 4 inches naked man jumping at you with a spear would be pretty scary. Considering they were headhunters, seeing them naked while decapitating your friend would be quite terrifying. During the Second Persian invasion of Greece, Xerxes I ordered to build a bridge to cross the Hellespont, or the Dardanelles. After a lot of hard work made by engineers, soldiers, peasants, and when the work was almost done, a terrible storm destroyed the bridge. Xerxes was so pissed off, so he ordered all of their soldiers to whip the sea 300 times for not obey him and comply with his plans. Yeah, I can see that response. I'd be pretty pissed too. After the American Revolution, a French guy tried to bring a kilogram and a beater and such to the US. The metric system was new back then, so we could have a standardized measurement system for the people. Long story short, he got kidnapped by pirates and died before he reached the States. Titanic was pretty much the nearest to an unsinkable ship as it's possible to build. It was just a 1 in a million collision that caused relatively little damage, but spread over a large area that could sink her. Such a collision had never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. In survivability, she was surpassed only by her 2 sister ships, which were modified after the disaster to appease the public. The modifications were something of a knee-jerk reaction and were never used or needed. The main problems was that the cold turned the metal brittle, so the rivets snapped rather than warping, allowing the plates to come loose, and that the ship tried to dodge the iceberg, which made a large gash across the side. Had the ship just slammed head first into it, it would have been, relatively, fine. William Henry Harrison skipped the coat and hat for his inauguration day address. It was unusually cold that day and he proceeded to give the longest inauguration speech in history. Dead 31 days later from pneumonia. He did it because someone called him a wimp. Genghis Khan and his subsequent 2 generations killed millions of people. Entire cities. Villages wiped out. Skulls stacked so high. From the distance, they looked like snow-capped mountains. So many bodies left by the roads that the grease and liquid from the rotting flesh would turn roads into marshes. The sacking of Baghdad was so violent and bloody that the infrastructure still hasn't recovered 800 years later. This empire killed so many people that it affected climate change, though I can't find my source for that. If you count the fact that the Black Death probably infiltrated Europe by the Mongolian silk trade routes, you can tack on an additional 50 million deaths to its bill in Europe alone. So lineage was something of a big deal among Mongolians, and they extended their beliefs to their foes. Specifically, they believed that royal blood was not to be spilled. And so when dealing with nobles after a conquest, they got creative. Most of the time they'd do something heinous like boiling people alive or burning them, or some other torturous method that technically didn't shed blood. In at least one instance, however, they got the nobles all together and laid them flat on the ground. Then, basically built a dance floor on top of them, where they rage partied for days straight, slowly crushing the people below. Another Mongol fact. This all comes from Dan Carlin's hardcore history podcast Wrath of the Khans, which I highly recommend. Been a while though, so details are hazy. At some point during Genghis Khan's rule, he decided to send a relatively small wrecking force over some mountains in what I believe is modern day Russia Georgia region, just to see what is on the other side and come back. Well, this wrecking force ran into an entire ducking empire and straight up conquered it. Ducking, like and subscribe.